So my name is Nicky Wynne and I'm a lawyer at BBAD Practice. The majority of the work that we do is in relation to Crown prosecutions. So Ben Vanderkov holds the Crown Solicitor's warrant for the Manawatu region. So we prosecute the serious crime that happens in our region. We also do some departmental prosecutions, regulatory prosecutions, some private client work, and we also prosecute on behalf of the SPCA. So as a lawyer and prosecutor, it's a really exciting time for us because I think a lot has been happening in the animal welfare space recently, including the Amendment Act, which came into force in 2015. The Amendment Act did a number of things, including introducing sentience into our legislation through the long title. It gave more powers to animal welfare inspectors, and so you'll hear later from Carl about this new provision which allows animal welfare inspectors to seize an animal where there is a clear risk of imminent harm happening to the animal. The amendment also clarified the position on the ill treatment of animals in the wild. So that includes reckless and willful ill treatments in relation to wild animals. And this clarification is very important because we've had a couple of cases in relation to acceptable hunting practices. The amendments also gave the Minister for Primary Industries the power to make regulations under the Act. And so I'm sure a number of you have been involved in the consultation process with MPI regarding a whole suite of regulatory proposals. The regulations which will be enforceable are either going to be prosecutable offences or infringement offences. So the amendment also brings in a whole new infringement regime, which we've never previously had in animal welfare law. In my opinion, the most significant amendment is the introduction of the word sentient into our long title of the Animal Welfare Act. It's this ability to perceive or feel things, having the power of perception, having consciousness, capacity to feel, perceive, or experience subjectively. So we know that animals are able to feel emotions and experience psychological trauma. The science supports that. But to now have that specifically enshrined in our legislation is, I think, extremely significant. And so it's kind of taking this perception of animals being property, people's property, as just something that actually has the ability to feel the same emotions that humans can. So one way I think that sentience can really be pursued is in our sentencing regime. So in New Zealand, our sentencing regime is governed by the Sentencing Act 2002, and under that Act, the courts consider the impact that criminal offending has had on victims for a start. The aggravating features that we tend to rely on the most are the ones where we say the victim was particularly vulnerable, or that the offender was abusing a position of trust or authority over the animal, or the harm caused by the offending on the animal. But if just taking a look at that definition of victim, can anyone see at the very start what our first problem might be? It all starts, yeah, that's right. We've got a whole criteria of how we define what a victim is and who a victim is, but it all starts with this qualifier at the start of a person. So very strictly speaking, our animals aren't victims under the Sentencing Act. All we can say now and point to is sentience. We've now got something in our law which heightens the status of animals in the law to what the case previously was, where they're immediately seen as property. And also that there should be no distinction drawn between the species of animals, whether or not they're in the companion animal space or commercial/production animals. We have made, however, some really good progress in our sentencing cases, and judges are now starting to accept the link between domestic violence against humans and violence against animals. And now the courts, we're starting to notice, are taking into account previous convictions that the defendant has in relation to a human. So it could be an assault charge or something of that kind. And they will treat it as aggravating the violence caused, in this case, towards an animal, which is really it's really good ground for us to be making. The courts have also been very receptive to our submissions about the extreme abuse of trust involved in animal cruelty and neglect cases. Because animals are completely reliant on us, aren't they? We decide to restrict their freedom in some way. They have no choice as to who their carer is, and so we've got an obligation to not only prevent cruelty and keep them safe, but provide positive obligations now, in my argument, in my opinion, because they're sentient beings. Judge Callahan said, and I quote because I love this quote, "Violence to a puppy dog in particular is probably just, if not more, aggravating than violence to a human person, or an adult person anyway, who can at least probably react or speak up for themselves, whereas a puppy dog," and yes, he calls this dog a puppy dog, of course, "is enclosed in the environment where it belongs." So I think there has been some hesitance, or there is a hesitance in our expert evidence in terms of veterinarians giving expert opinion on anything that's beyond physical pain, suffering, something that doesn't relate to an external, overt, visible injury such as an open bleeding wound. And there's also a reluctance on the part of the courts to recognise anything beyond that. But we do have cases where the injury isn't obvious, or there is no injury. Just because there is no external wound or something that you can point to that lay people can see, it doesn't mean that it's not suffering pain from an internal source. So I think there couldn't really be a more exciting time to be in animal welfare now that the legislation and the policies and the case law is starting to catch up to society's expectations and attitudes towards animals. Being in the business of animal welfare prosecutions, and in combination with my experience at MPI, has really made me realise just how emotive and contentious the subject is. I think it's because people feel this overwhelming sense of obligation to advocate on behalf of animals who at the end of the day cannot speak for themselves. We're getting to a time now where we're noticing more and more cases being reported to the SPCA by members of the public, having the presence of mind to pick up a camera and start filming something or photographing something and handing it to the SPCA, or providing statements when they might be putting themselves at risk. And again, I think this comes down to the sense of obligation and duty that we all feel like we have as part of this community where we live with animals in our environment. And if it's not members of the public deciding to hand this in, then we're also seeing more and more defendants filming themselves doing quite horrendous things and supplying, or not supplying it, the SPCA find it through their amazing investigative techniques, and then they provide us with the best evidence. We live in a world now where we care about the lives that animals lived before they or their products ended up on our shelves. Very recently I was in Wellington and saw a complete vegan shop pop up, selling all vegan food products, beauty products, to everything, and I was just so amazed because what that shows, what that reflects, is how there is a demand for that now. I can tell you there wouldn't have been a need for a full vegan shop in the middle of Cuba Street 10 or 20 years ago. So I'll say it one last time, it's a very exciting time to be in animal welfare.